So this is not a typical ROI talk, so not a typical return on investment kind of talk. I think if you want an example of that, Arvik had a talk by Trevor Calabro last year, I believe it was, and that has been the clearest, simplest framing that I've seen of talking about ROI and talking about the math behind the ROI. So I think that's a place to go. That's a really excellent place to go to get that kind of background. What I'm talking about is a little bit more specifically focused on ethnography, and that's not something that everybody does. Don't worry if you don't do ethnography. Don't worry if you're not an anthropologist. This talk can still be for you. I think the framework that I've developed, while it's specific to ethnography, what that really means is that it's specific to a multi-method, largely qualitative study. It's specific to research that is investigating that messy, complex problem space. And it's specific to research that's often identifying and defining problems, right? We're not figuring out what to do about those problems necessarily, but we are really digging into that problem space. So this is often happening years before the world sees the finished product. So, again, it's not going to be relevant to everything that we do in UX or customer insights, but I think that ethnography is really an excellent way to start off an initiative. You bake in some excellent insights that help drive potentially multiple streams of work. And so that's something that a simple ROI really doesn't help us get to. It narrows the focus and or it sort of reduces the ways that we can talk about what success looks like. So I'm going to speak a little bit to, I don't know why it's not advancing. There. I'm going to speak a little bit to thinking about impact over returns. So return on investment is really an impact measure. And I'm going to kind of, as I sort of start with that, I'll talk a little bit about my own trajectory as a researcher, because I've worked in a lot of different sectors. And I've worked in-house, I've worked as a freelancer. So there's a lot of weaving and winding in my past, and that kind of will help contextualize a little bit about where my thinking is coming from and kind of how I got to the point of thinking about talking about return in a structured way, but without the dollars and cents sort of calculation. Again, that ROI calculation is great because it really does sort of fit into your day-to-day, how you operate day-to-day as a researcher. I'm thinking about how you want to talk about something that's maybe a larger time frame, sort of retrospective looking. So there's no shade here at all on calculation of ROI. That's actually part of this, but it's sort of like a little piece of the bigger puzzle that we're trying to unpack. And again, like I said, what troubles me about that ROI narrative is that it feels constraining. It over-indexes on those immediate returns, and it's pretty singular. So what I want to help us kind of understand is, and I have a paper that I wrote on this as well, and so I'll provide a link for you guys to dig into the paper that I wrote. But if you're investing human capital into understanding and solving human problems through a multi-method approach, incorporating observation and a mix of structured and semi-structured methodologies, what I'm talking about still applies to the kinds of things that you're looking at. And so when I talk about some myths of ROI, I'll also be kind of addressing a couple of examples from those different periods of my career. And then I'll talk about what does it actually mean to invest in ethnography? What is it that makes ethnography different, special? And so I'll share another sort of framing or example in that section around Habitat for Humanity. And that example is really what drove building this framework out on how to look at what does a long-term return on ethnographic investment look like. So, again, the key premise of this is, how might we define our impact to decision makers? How can we talk to people who are making decisions, not necessarily about whether to fund a specific project, maybe not even whether to hire us, but how to think about research within the organization. So for me, I'm thinking about organizations that have the potential to really grow more holistically across multiple streams of work by embracing something like ethnography at the early stages of the work that they do. And for us as ethnographers, anybody else in the room who's an ethnographer, how can we embrace a narrative that moves us forward unapologetically? What I feel and hear a lot when I talk to other ethnographers is trying to force what we do into that mathematical model for ROI that's really based on more tactical types of research. So that's the premise for today. Oops, now how do I go back? Hang on. So this is the resume. My PhD is in sociocultural anthropology, and for a while I worked at academia. So a lot of what I did was in Siberia. I worked at the intersection of household economies, natural resources, religion, traditional medicine, and those things might, put it down on the slide because those things on the face of it don't necessarily feel like they're interconnected. But as I started exploring how are people in the post-Soviet era managing their household economies in areas that are rich in natural resources, religion came up as a frame for how to manage resources. And as I started looking around deeper, multiple studies later, started diving into some of the resources and some of the opportunities that existed within that space, not just within the household economy, but within village economies and larger spaces. Traditional medicine and herbal medicine came up as a primary opportunity, I'm going to call it, sort of a pain point, but also a strong economic opportunity that wasn't necessarily being leveraged. So all of those things intersect, and if you live there, that makes sense. But for people who maybe are on the cusp of a particular geographic space or external to those communities, those religious or traditional medicine communities, those opportunities might not be as transparent. And this is kind of the exciting thing about what ethnography can really help us do. So as an academic, it took me years to figure out all of these intersections and how it connects and how to talk about it and how to frame it. I wanted people with an undergraduate degree in anthropology to be able to have examples in their back pocket to be able to talk about this stuff. So that, as an academic, led me towards focusing on service learning and becoming quite the methodology geek. So some of that comes back into how I'm thinking about the work that I'm presenting today. After academia, I spent about a decade freelancing, and again, you'll see a lot of variation. So within the policy sphere, I did a lot of program innovation work, testing proof of concepts, getting feedback on them, and then another stream of that work was policy messaging. So did a lot of research around taxation messaging. So if you want resources for that to make people in your life feel a little bit better about paying taxes, since we're coming off of that season, let me know. And then market research, a lot of ethnographic intercepts. So not just doing survey work in store, but watching how people move through the store and interact with products. So a lot of that contextual research, a lot of deeper interviews, including home studies. So going into people's homes and looking at, for example, well, I've already told you one of the things that I'll be talking about is a marketing messaging piece around Born in the Carolinas. So if you are in North Carolina, you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Pepsi. So we looked at where are people storing their soda in their home, what kind of memorabilia do they have, how does it fit into their everyday life. So those kinds of things within my freelancing space. And then I came into in-house at Lowe's because I wanted to be in-house. I wanted to have more of an influence on some of the decision makers, more day-to-day sort of experiences. and particularly more longitudinal experience, like being able to really drive decision making across a longer time frame. So I'm super excited about our third speaker today too. So I hope you guys will see some parallels in our talks. Let me see, was there anything else I wanted to say on that slide? The other thing that I wanted to mention around this is that even within the Lowe's environment, doing ethnography still matters. Like, it's not about accumulating a bunch of small studies, but having a foundational piece of work that you can tie later work back to. And that's also part of what I'm trying to sort of create a framework for. How do we talk about that longitudinal work that we're doing? So even if a lot of your work is smaller, more tactical studies, maybe thinking about reframing some of that accumulation of knowledge in a way that allows you to actually ask for and deliver these deeper, sort of richer, messy problem space kind of ethnographic studies or discovery studies. So those are some things to think about too as I'm kind of walking through some of my examples. So I want to dive into what I'm calling ROI myths. ROI is a narrative, just like the narrative I'm providing for you today. It's a way of talking about the work that we do. It's storytelling, just like when we deliver insights. So I think everybody should feel comfortable talking about return on investment, whether it's with the mathematical equations for that immediate work, whether it's in the framework of what I'm presenting today. Storytelling is a good thing. And I've already kind of touched on some of these myths a little bit, but the first one, impact can be measured in dollars and cents, right? All research, including the choice to not do research, when organizations are choosing not to research something, that always brings in financial, temporal, and trust costs. So the costs are multitude, but the return on investment is generally only talked about in terms of a financial benefit. So I think the myth in this is that we can talk about other kinds of benefits and we can quantify them, maybe not in a monetary way, but we can quantify those through a ratio, through a growth number of some sort. But we can also talk about things like resilience, ability to adapt to uncertainty because of decisions that we made. So impact is not just dollars and cents. The second myth is that impact can be seen in quarters. We're generally asked to measure this stuff on a very tight time horizon, like quarters. But even some of the tactical work that our teams do at Lowe's, the research happens 2, 3, 4 quarters before a product releases. And when they do the little rah-rah product release slide, sometimes the researchers are left off the slide. It's like by the time the thing got across the finish line, they forgot that there was an impact that was driven by people who were going out and asking questions, talking to people, testing designs. So I think there's this, even within the tactical work that we do, it's hard for people to remember that we were part of the impact that got delivered. So it's even more so when we talk about ethnography. But on the flip side, ethnographic research tends to hold its validity, its accuracy in terms of representing a moment in time, representing a user group for years, not just quarters. So tactical work can be quickly, let's turn around, let's get some information on this, and let's deliver. And then by the time you deliver the solution, the problem that you were identifying, if you did the right thing, the problem's been solved. So that research doesn't have the same sort of staying power that some ethnographic work around workflows and attitudes, mental models might have. So think about the work that you do that might carry some relevancy past the immediate project that you were working on. That's another place where you can look to see how this framework might support you. And then finally, business outcomes. The myth is that business outcomes are directly correlated to our contributions, right? It's not always easy, right? If I worked on a project and I did a concept test, for example, or if I did a survey project around a design, around a problem space, around even a persona, the idea is that that is, one-to-one correlated to a project. The the outcomes come directly from the outputs. So I did a report, I developed these personas, and then there were outcomes that came from the design that resulted from that. So there was increased profit, improved customer satisfaction. But one reason, and so this is a big reason why our ethnographers are really reluctant to measure impact, because a lot more people are involved in the journey from our insights to the finished product, or service or campaign after we've given our contributions. So that time lag really makes it hard for us to make that direct connection. But I think one of the things, again, that we can look to with some of this longer term research is how does this foundational work support us in talking about impacts that go beyond fiscal improvements over a quarter or improved customer satisfaction scores over a quarter or a half year or a year. There are things that, and I'm going to come into this first example, there are things that go beyond dollars and cents, often also go beyond that sort of direct correlation. And so I want to talk a little bit about some research that I did in the early 2010s for Pepsi. I was working as a contractor for a larger company, and the short-term impact of this project was really some trial and error on the part of Pepsi with product lines and even some advertising. But the thing that had the staying power, the long-term impact, really came from the opportunity that they did not know that they had. And this, I will tell you, some people on the call, I think, who know me, probably heard this story before, because this is the story I tell in all my interviews. The client problem was really, they wanted direction on product innovation. And the reality that we all know exists is that Pepsi and Coca-Cola are in this death match, but we don't know, it's not really for sort of staying power as a brand. They're both really well-known brands. They're fighting over like 2% margins in terms of their revenue generation. So how do we generate more sales? Is it a new product line? How do we get people, if it's not a new product line, how do we get people to pay full price for a product? So back in the early 2010s, I don't know if they still do this, but both companies in alternate weeks would be running these buy two, get three free product sales at the major grocery stores. So they were not making a whole lot of money on the product, their flagship products. So how could they get people to potentially buy more frequently? So these were home interviews that we did. They captured a wide array of all of the ways that beverages, broadly, not just soda, beverages can fit into occasions. So that could include daily rituals like, what do I grab on my way to work? What's the thing that I have at the end of the day when I'm coming home from work? What's the special treat that I give my kids when they've been behaving well? And so those were the kinds of day-to-day occasions, but it also included things like holidays, birthdays, what other kinds of occasions were coming up. Maybe you had an annual barbecue party to celebrate, the end of the school year. So imagine 5 ethnographers in 5 different cities across the country, and none of us were soda drinkers. So we were having, every time we would do interviews, we would have these daily debrief calls, and one day, one of the ethnographers said, I don't know if this is something. And that's kind of if you ever work on a collaborative project with ethnographers, you will hear things like that. I don't know if this is something. This is like, I think there's a pattern here, but I think this is meaningful, but I don't know if there's a pattern here, right? I think this is meaningful, but I'm not sure if there's a pattern here. And she was talking about a local or a regional soda in Colorado. And then somebody else was like, oh my God, I'm seeing this too. And I said, oh my gosh, in North Carolina, cheerwine. I have so many recipes for how people make their cheerwine punch for the Christmas holidays. And these are people who may not drink cheerwine any other time of year. I grew up in a state that had a local little, if you grew up in southeastern Wisconsin, 50-50, you know what I'm talking about. It's a grapefruit and lime soda that is just my favorite childhood soda. can't get it anywhere outside of southeastern Wisconsin. There is a pull that people feel towards localized products. It's a nostalgia factor. It's a geography factor. It's a lot of things. And at the time in North Carolina, there was a distributor in Charlotte who had a like single solitary, very ugly billboard in Charlotte that said "Born in North Carolina" and the name of his bottling company. And so that photo, a photo of that billboard, went into my report for this project, along with a recommendation that if they're going to play with this "Born in North Carolina," that they actually do "Born in Carolinas," because Pepsi is a sponsor of all of our major sports teams in North Carolina. And all of those major sports teams are trying to build a larger fan base by incorporating South Carolina. So even though Pepsi-Cola was established in 1898 in New Bern, North Carolina, their slogan is "Born in the Carolinas." Why? Because ethnographers said, you know what? There's an opportunity for you to sell the nostalgia factor that you thought that Coca-Cola had cornered the market on. So how do I tie this to revenue? How are they even tying this campaign to revenue? And then how do I tie it to revenue given my status as a contractor? I'm going to need to pause for 1 second and grab my plug. But I'm going to go to the next slide while I do that, because there's a little bit of text on there. So y'all are at the mercy of the tech, but you're also at the mercy of my traveling schedule this week, and I apologize for that. Okay, so we had an iconic brand campaign that increased, presumably it's increasing revenue because they've continued to have this campaign for another 15 years. And it's become sort of this logo is the one that they settled on that is sort of the iconic logo. So, and I've seen it outside of North Carolina, North and South Carolina. So when it first came out, I would take pictures in gas stations of this logo showing up everywhere because it was a big deal. It was probably one of the largest, most well-known impacts of any work that I had done up to that point, which was a little bit odd to me. But let me talk a little about another another impact, another myth. That impact can be seen quickly. So I think one of the things that's going to sound really familiar to everybody on this call, regardless of whether or not you're an ethnographer, is that things change, priorities change. So imagine ethnographic research. It takes a little bit longer. It doesn't always have to. I mean, I've done ethnographic projects in 6 weeks. It's scope it so that you can get it done. But ethnographic research essentially is about uncovering, unmasking, untangling that messy problem space. So for anybody who takes that kind of early generative knowledge and uses it for ideation, this might be the designers in the group, this might be some of the product folks in the group, you know that not every ideation session, not every design jam is going to lead to a product feature. And everybody, even outside of UX, knows that work gets deprioritized all the time. Does that mean that the research that informed those efforts, those ideation sessions and whatnot, doesn't have an ROI because nothing got built? Or that nothing got built immediately? Absolutely not. We need to speak in rather sort of broad brushstrokes about sort of how this can help. So I think the first thing that I want to point out, and I can actually provide a link to this article that I'm referencing here as well, but A colleague of mine, and I'm blanking on what company she worked for, but she coined a term, research amnesia, right? All of us have been in a room where we're sitting there realizing that we've already done the research. We already know this, right? There's, particularly with enterprise ethnography, this is work that's inherently longitudinal, so things are going to come up. So I want to give one really quick example, and I'll try to walk through this pretty fast. But there's a case that came up in 2025 for us. We had been working on, so one of the things that I mentioned that I worked on at Lowe's is some of the platform work. So we do a lot of our own technology, building it in-house. So design needed to have some inputs around rebuilding our platform experience. So think about your navigation, like your landing page navigation. You log into your terminal at work. What does that look like? That's what we were trying to understand. That's a pretty big mandate. So one of the questions that came up for us in that work, and I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but one of the questions that came up for us around that was clocking in. So for that and other sort of big unknown, like we've never thought about this before questions, the team decided to reach out to the research team, and I worked with another researcher on how to incorporate some observation data, some contextual research into this project. So we were looking not just at what people are doing, so we weren't just documenting workflows, but where are they doing it? Physically, where are they in the store? Where are they clocking in? And what's the context around that flow? Is somebody else present? Is it the computer that they always work on? What's driving them to go to that place in the store versus another place in the store? This was pretty meaty stuff. And I spent a day in store with this other researcher, getting him set up to sort of think about this framework for how to go after the data. Essentially, I gave him a one-day ethnographic boot camp, and he was fabulous. The research was fabulous. It was super well received. And then priorities changed. Nothing got work done. Fast forward to last summer, we were rolling out a new single sign-on experience in the stores. It solved a ton of associate problems. We were all super excited about it. But security had one niggling little question. They were concerned about rolling beyond pilot stores until we understood this one simple question. I was smack in the middle of another project, but I said, you know what? The stores that are in the pilot are the same stores that I'm going to for this other project, so let me collect some data from, for both projects. And it was supposed to be just enough research to figure out if we need to do more research. But the reality was we already had the research. The research had been done 6 months prior. So I did some unstructured interviews and observations in stores, and then the project the report that I ended up writing really drew on that first project. So I was able to pull that thread forward from that other study. We were able to present really rich insights based on 2 full days in store, not even 2 full, a day and a half in a store, which is not a lot of research for something ethnographic. But again, the deeper ethnographic work had already been done. The insights had already been shared. Now it was about talking about why these insights mattered in this particular context. So that's something that I was really excited about. So in terms of investing in ethnography, like why does this matter? Again, that timeline is about more than the length of the engagement, but it's also about webs of significance, right? So we had taken the time in this previous research to understand workflows, understand problems, but not problems like we need to fix this now, but really how does this problem fit into the ecosystem of how people experience these workflows within a physical environment. So it's not just what they're doing, it's where they're doing it, it's how they're impacted by other things in their environment. And so we can talk about that in terms of webs of significance. So that if you read the paper, there's some academic references in there. But this is really about taking the strange, irregular, inexplicit, the things that people can't articulate themselves to you by a combination of observation, interviewing, follow-ups. You begin to develop the skill to be able to name and normalize it. And that gets us to a lot deeper insights. The next thing that happens is that anthropologists are also, looking at when the work that we're doing is organization, a group, a community, that's in flux. So we talk about that liminal state that people are in. This is about the uncertainty of transition. So ethnography, when we come in, our goal is to not just say, here's a direction you could go in to solve a specific problem, but it's really to amplify, right? It's more than the sum of its parts. That's why I use the word alchemy. It's more alchemy than arithmetic. This is why an arithmetic equation for measuring ROI doesn't quite work, because the kinds of transformations that we can facilitate with this type of research go far beyond, the types of problems that we're presented with to research. Cool. So I'm going to give a quick rundown of my third example, and I'm very close to time because we've spent a lot of time on the technology. So I'm going to pick up the pace on this one because the case study itself is fairly self-explanatory. In 2006, it was the first quote-unquote real design research project I did, and it was a service learning project I did with my students in my applied anthropology class. We had a ask from Habitat for Humanity to go in and do some research. And it was a very customer-focused problem statement, but it was already kind of in the frame of a solution. So the question that we were investigating was, would Habitat homeowners be willing to choose a multifamily residence over a single-family residence? Part of the problem for this was that it was getting harder to find infill lots across the city, but the original remit was actually smaller than that. When they came to me initially, the staff wanted to develop a framework for multifamily residences based on the experience of other chapters. It sounded like it was already kind of a done deal. And that multifamily was what they were doing because other chapters went that way. They had been pushed into it, though. Most other chapters had sort of run into a financial problem of being able to purchase land. And as we dug into the problem statement around multifamily versus single family, the real problem, it turned out, was this nexus of how Habitat for Humanity defines success and property values, land values. So they were looking towards a future where infill land would not be possible. But it was always going to be possible, it was just going to be more expensive. So that ties to their definition of success. It wasn't going to be possible to keep buying land at a rate that allowed them to be successful, and success meant year-over-year growth. Every year we're increasing the number of homes that we build. More people have a home to live in because of us, right? And so that was really the root problem, that they wanted to not just sustain the number of homes, but actually grow the number of families who could have a simple, decent place to live. So basically what we did was a workshop format, and we focused on what do you want, what would be your sort of ideal state, interior to your home, exterior to your home, and then we broke it beyond the home itself. Because we were thinking about infill, what parts of town would people be maybe a multifamily doesn't feel as nice, quote unquote nice, as a single family. So maybe people would be willing to live in a multifamily if it were closer to the city, like center of the city, if it were closer to a bus stop. So these were some of the speculations that the staff had. What ended up happening was we added a layer of what would be your ideal community, like beyond the borders of your property. What does that need to look like? And that opened up a lot of discussion, and that became the focus of the results. And so let me jump to those results, right? So we were only doing research, and this was a group of people, mind you, that I was training to do research. So this is a 12-week research project. Probably if this were a consulting project, it would have been about 4 weeks. So it was very rapid. But what we learned was that people were excited about the possibility of options, right? And one of the options that was not on anybody's radar was the idea of the community itself. And so I'm going to read just one quote from the paper. So one of the people that was in one of these groups that we worked with said, I feel like they, meaning Habitat, I feel like they are choosing people to put in those communities so that we can become a community and help others. I mean, they don't just let anyone in Habitat. So the notion here is that we've gone through a vetting process, we've gone through financial training, we've gone through all of this work, and now, and some people were actually resentful. This person was relatively neutral about it, but some people were kind of resentful, like, I'm having a hard enough time keeping my own life together. I can't be there as a role model for everybody else. And so this idea came up across all of our focus groups that what if you had a community, like you're trying to build community with us, why not give us our own community? And so they did. And that has been one of the main ways that Habitat has been able to maintain and actually increase the number of houses built each year. So upshot of this is that this didn't create this 12-week research project that was probably been 4-week if it was a consultancy. That project led to 4 separate initiatives. One was a critical repairs program, keeping people in homes before they lose them. One is the rehab program, and I don't have a date for the starting of that, so I didn't put that on the slide. And then first multifamily structures got built out by the time we ended up in the housing bubble. And then the first Habitat neighborhood was built in 2012. So this photo is from 2023 when I volunteered with my teammates on the Carter build here in Charlotte. So what all of these programs do is that it coalesces around the issues brought up around safety, community, and location. And so that is something that you can't necessarily put a price on. You're going to hear a little bit at the very end once I present the model. This is the model in a nutshell. And I'm going to go through the next couple of slides pretty quickly, but this is it. This is it in a nutshell. This immediate impact, this is the amplification of our impact over time, right? The immediate impact is early, but it's just one tiny input, and it is a necessity for everything else. So I want to be really clear that with any ethnographic project, you have an immediate value, or the work won't stick around. It won't have staying power. It won't be something that allows you to have that longer term investment. So the immediate impact is absolutely necessary. It's also something that can be measured using traditional ROI measures like the one from the previous RVIC talk. So over time, there's a couple other ways, and it's great if you can hit all 3 of these, but these markers are markers of, I'm calling them principles. There's 3 sort of medium-term markers or principles that you want to try to hit. You want to have a longer-term impact. So immediate impact might be triage, and then longer-term impact is a shift in a program. Strategic engagement is you as the ethnographer really staying engaged in the solutioning phase, when product, when design, when your program managers, when your marketing folks are sort of deciding what to do with the research, you're still engaged in part of those conversations. You're driving perhaps those conversations as one of your outputs. And then organizational impact. Can you change the culture? Like this work done by students absolutely changed the culture of Charlotte's Habitat for Humanity chapter, which has changed the culture of Habitat chapters across the entire country. That's not all on us, but the organizational impact would not have happened were it not for the relationship between our research team and our stakeholders. And then ideally over time, like the Pepsi, like the Habitat, communities, these become sustainable outcomes. So you're not just creating a product and it works for a while and then it fails, and then you create a new product and then it works for a while and then it fails. These are campaigns that have staying power. These are campaigns that become iconic. These are programs that become baked into the fiber of the organization. So these are the kinds of impacts that it's really hard to measure with dollars and cents. So let me go to the next slide, a little bit more on that. Longer term outcome, yes, it can be tangible, it can be direct, and the measure can be rooted in those financial incomes, but it can also be rooted in meaningful outcomes that are non-financial. So clients, number of clients served, CSAT scores, and long-term impact really comes from answering those questions that your stakeholders didn't ask. You gotta get curious. And this is one of my all-favorite anthropology quotes. Zora Neale Hurston, research is formalized curiosity. It's poking and prying with a purpose. So that is kind of the anybody on the call who knows me knows that's me. There's always a reason behind every question. Strategic engagement and organizational change, I think, kind of go together. So it's really understanding the logic of the organization, the logic of the humans interacting with. It doesn't have to end with a readout. You're helping the organization move from that liminal state, that betwixt in between, to kind of a North Star. It's easier to do that in-house, but you can also do it with workshops and other kinds of engagements. With the Habitat group, I've stayed on as an advisor to Habitat for 2 years. So until that, from 2006 to 2006 to 2008, when that first multifamily home was actually built and broke, we had the ribbon cutting. That's when my engagement with them ended. And part of why you want to stay engaged is because that work that you've done, that foundation that you've laid with the research is really about becoming the new taken for granted. Anytime you're an in-house researcher and people around the company start using the language from your report as if that's how they've always talked about the problem space, that is one of the most satisfying things. Can't put a number on that, but you also kind of want to think about how it relates to the overall objectives. And then finally, I've already used the word resiliency, and these sustained incomes are about providing resiliency. So I'm going to actually read a little bit of what the statement that I came up with for this Habitat example. So if you were to ask me what I thought my impact was using this framework, I tell you that by shifting the mental framework of how they build, so that's that strategic engagement and organizational change. By shifting the mental framework of how they build, Habitat created a flexible housing model that includes infill housing, renovated homes, townhomes, and entire communities. That's sustainable outcomes. That's the resiliency. And this is the dollars and cents part. Allowing them to nearly triple the number of families served annually, even as Charlotte area housing costs skyrocket. So they're able to threefold increase the number of houses they build each year, even as costs have gone up, because they've built a model that's resilient and flexible. And they've done that because they have a mind shift. So that long-term ROI is really a statement of how you changed how they think, which created impacts based on what they do now. And that's different. And it makes a financial difference in some cases. In this case, it makes a difference in terms of number of families served, because that's how they measure their impact. So that's what I got. And I am like run out of time for questions, I think. And